Good morning, folks. Welcome back to Storytime with Nick. Today's story is entitled From the Basement to the First Floor. So, this story is going to talk about getting my grandparents from the basement to the first floor because that was kind of an interesting process. So, I had mentioned a couple stories ago, I had sort of a mini-series on it, that we had bits of the house renovated. And they moved in after the renovations were complete. So they moved in about fall of 2010. We had gotten the place done over the summer 2010, and by fall it was ready for them to move in because Debbie had moved out about the winter earlier. So what this involved was a whole lot of, we need to find out where all of this stuff belongs, because the layout to the first floor and the basement are very similar, but they're also very different. In the sense that there's a lot more space to be had for free use, because the boiler room and the laundry room, they were two areas that were sort of dedicated space. You couldn't really have anything else in there. But now we have two open areas, a hallway with the closet and a bedroom, and we also had a kitchen and a bedroom. So that's a lot more space that they could work with. So at this point, they're old, of course, and we had to help carry up one of their tables. They had just a regular four-legged table, but they also had, it was in storage. They had one of these extendable tables where you have like the folding sections where you can make the table longer or shorter, and you can have people over, and you can have like 30 people sit at a table that you can fold it up and it's meant for like 6 people type thing. It was one of those tables. They had to move it section by section, and of course they would end up putting it in the area where the dining table went. They also wanted to put some supports on the floor just to make sure that it wouldn't scratch it, because we had a carpet, but for whatever reason, the legs were just so heavy that even with the carpet, if we nudged it any bit, it would scratch the floor. So we decided to put some supports, one of these like low floor buffers, under the carpet around it. Also just to hold it in place too. I'm not sure why we did it looking back, but it did hold the carpet down very nicely because it would slide a little bit, like no more than an inch, but still, it would slide and it would end up scratching the floor. So then we had to get new sofas, because the sofas my grandparents had, they were these aged sofas they had in their old house, which they had lived in late 80s, early 90s. They had started living there, and that was when they had gotten those sofas. But those sofas kind of served their purpose, and they'd actually pretty quickly found replacements at a local furniture store here. Those old sofas were black. These were brown, and they were the exact same dimensions, and they also had reclining features, and that was very nice. So next up, we had to move the TV. In these days, they had a 1975 Admiral and a 1992 Panasonic TV, which originally was the TV with my setup. When I was a baby, we had the 92 Panasonic, and eventually we got the 2006 Panasonic, and the 92 was sent down to my grandparents. It was put in the living room, and the 75 Admiral was moved to, it was actually kept in storage for quite a while because they didn't need a TV in the bedroom because the bedroom was kind of a weird setup. But when they moved to the first floor, they decided, let's put this 1992 Panasonic in our bedroom. And it kind of just didn't work, that 75 Admiral that they had. Well, it did work. What I mean is, it just didn't work with the area. It was kind of too small, because this was a big area and you really couldn't see it that well. So they decided they were going to get a TV from a family friend who had just bought a TV, but they weren't really a big fan of it. It didn't quite fit right. They were actually lied to about the specifications. So my grandparents said, hey, we'll take that off your hands and you can have this 75 Admiral. And they did the swap, and they got the 75 Admiral, and we got the Philips 2010. I might have mentioned in the past, if I've ever mentioned it in my videos or to anyone in a comment, that it was a Sony 2010, but it was actually a Philips 2010 27-inch LCD TV. It had decent sound quality, decent picture quality. It held up for the most part, and that TV ended up being given away in the end after they died, but that was down the line. But so, getting back to moving stuff up, they didn't need to move any appliances because, oddly enough, the basement and the first floor had an identical 1992 Kenmore fridge. I'm talking about these white freezer on top, fridge on the bottom, no ice maker, just this weird white, like almost aluminum type material coating the thing. It was the exact same on the first floor and in the basement. Both from 1992-ish, because they were basically the exact same. And some other stuff here and there. They brought up their bed, of course, and they put it in their bedroom. And the bedroom had an AC. It was a 1982 Carrier Super Weathermaker. There were 4 of these in the entire house. There were 5 AC mounts. The 5th one was taken up by a 2002 Carrier. I'm not sure if it was a later design of the Super Weathermaker or if it was a different product line altogether, but it was a 2002 unit. It was the same concept as the Super Weathermakers. It had a temperature switch, it had a mode switch, and it had an on or off, and some other controls here and there. One of them had a bad temperature switch by the time it was about 30 years old, and that was the only one that was ever serviced. It was the one in my living room, which I had mentioned in the last story, or 2 stories ago, rather, something like that. I forget how many of these I've recorded already. So if I get the numbers wrong, then don't unsubscribe or dislike or report me to Susan. But in my area was the AC, and then in my mother's area was the 2002, and then up in the attic was one, and down on the first floor in the bedroom was one, and in the dining area was one. So the only one that ever needed any kind of special service was the one in my area. What had happened was the temperature switch had gone bad, but that was easily serviced by my grandfather. Pop 4 screws, take out the old switch, put the new one in, button it up, and it was back in service. Simple, reliable, and just overall badass machines, because these were loud, motherfuckers. These were loud, and they made everything the Arctic. Let me tell you, the attic was hot. If you turned off the AC, the attic was not hot. It was hot. Very hot up there because we had a window and heat rises too, so yeah. But that's besides the point. I'm getting off topic here. But so there was one in their bedroom. There was also some windows. And for anyone wondering, all those units are still there now because I went for a walk past that old house a couple weeks ago, and they're still there. I can tell on the outside just by the rustiness that they're all still there, and it looks like they're still all working fine. So they had to move up also these cabinets for like these utensil cabinets that they had that were these like really decorative ones. It ended up being that was where the Philips would go, the Philips TV in the living room. You had this tall one, you had one tall one on one side, one tall one on the other, and you had this short but long one in the center. And it actually just so happened that the 2 long ones measured up to the exact same height as the TV when it stood on the small short one. We weren't going to put anything above it, but it was just funny how it ended up measuring just right. And of course there was a couple inches of space on each side. This was a 27-inch TV. And this little fixture, this little bit of furniture was, I believe, 34 inches? 36 inches? 34 or 36 inches. It was one of the two. But the TV had plenty of space. Then there was also a glass table that my grandparents had. It was a very nice old school table with these um, with these metal legs, very fancy design, um, painted gold, and this big glass panel on top that we would that my grandmother would spray with Windex every week. I would wipe it off, and then we would actually turn over the panel every couple months just so one side wouldn't get too scratched, some shit like that. They also had this really nice standing lamp that was entirely metal, and you could stick up a 200-watt incandescent light in there, and it lit up the area quite fine. This new area did have a light fixture that we installed, but sometimes my grandparents, they would use that lamp just because they were on the sofas and they would usually sit on the closer one. They would usually sit on the side closest to the lamp. Um, yeah, what else? What else? We had to get the cable hooked up to that apartment because now that Debbie was gone, I forget what provider she used, but we ended up getting my grandparents hooked up to DirecTV because we had that at the time. I believe Debbie's apartment still had Optimum because we had been using Optimum in the past, but Optimum decided to give us a big fat fuck you, so we gave a big fat fuck you back to Optimum. We left them and we went to DirecTV, which also ended up giving us a big fat fuck you one day in the future too. But we got their cable hooked up. We didn't need internet there because my grandparents, they didn't have computers. They weren't computer people. They just needed a landline phone. Yes, they still used landline. And we tested it. That phone worked fine. It can make calls. It could do this. They could hear it from literally anywhere in the house. All the plumbing was fine. All the lighting was fine. All the electrical systems worked perfectly because after the renovations were done, we had them tested. And we also had some bits repainted. I think we had repainted the entire unit. We had shined up the floors. And the place looked really nice by the time they were ready to move in. So they moved in, and that was really the end of the story because they didn't have any special problems. Once they were in, it was just a matter of getting used to living on the first floor instead of living in the basement. And then the basement was eventually taken over by Tatiana, and you know how that story series went. But this was them. So they now had the first floor all to themselves. And instead of having to go up these really weird old concrete stairs and this squeaky basement door to get into the backyard, they really just had to take a couple stairs with this back door. And it was nice that way. And that was kind of where they just were. But so that's going to wrap up this story. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.